Wake up. Wake up.
In fact, the very thing that's enabling our Four Horsemen to ride with such vengeance. The modern-day Four Horsemen. A rapacious financial system, escalating organized violence, abject poverty for billions, and the exhaustion of the Earth's resources, are riding roughshod over those who can least afford it. They gallop unchallenged because the cognitive map that's been put in place by our schools, universities, and our media does not encourage us to question accepted norms. Instead, there is apathy.
In a sense, I think we're rather depressed societies. We've got used to the idea that there's nothing that can be done. There is no alternative, that, we're never going to deal with these environmental problems and we live in a dog-eat-dog society and that's it. I think what we have to take away from this is a recognition that most of these problems can be very substantially improved by making our societies more equal, reducing the income differences, and that also helps us to solve the environmental problems. We can reach a society that is qualitatively better for all of us.
Well, the apathy is sort of engineered because you don't have any discussion of this in the public media, hardly by surprise. The public media are owned by the real estate and the financial interests, and they're not going to explain to people the integration between the financial, insurance, and real estate sectors, the fire sector.
There's this disinformation going on, passing the buck, denying what the real driving factors are. All of these are common strategies. In fact, even in education, you can see that banks have helped to set up universities. They've funded them. They fund think tanks. They have educational foundations. They own newspapers. All of this stuff is going on as a kind of propaganda exercise so that the people don't actually work out what the problem is.
You should not assume because you don't have a background in economics or in law that these issues are somehow too complex for you. They're not complex at all. It's very simple. It's about power, and it's about democracy, and you understand that just as well as I do.
One source of this disinformation is the neoclassical school of economics. These economists and academics have been successful in convincing the world that their models were gospel. But just as Gutenberg's printing press was revolutionary in the 16th century, today we're at the dawn of internet enlightenment, which will remove the cloud of ignorance upheld by academic and media gatekeepers. Education can be a form of mass mind control, and it's astonishing that today neoclassical economics continues to be taught in all Ivy League universities.
I do get letters from students in economics departments at other universities. They're into some graduate program or something, and they say, oh, I just read such and such that you wrote, and this is the kind of thing that interests me. I'm stuck in this program here in which, I can't even talk about any of that. What's your advice? What should I do? What they're teaching you is what you're going to have to oppose, a lot of it. I mean, some of it's useful. But so some of it's useful, go ahead and learn it. And the other reason for learning the rest of it is know your enemy.
An individual might not be able to change the system, but they can change themselves. If we're not offered proper education, we must begin our own. And a good place to start is to become reacquainted with the classical economists, and with something that so few question, but that affects us all, our system of money.
If the monetary system of the world is not reformed, then we are headed towards the end of industrial civilization. I won't say that we're going to the end of humanity, but it's just going to be an absolute collapse of our world as we have known it, because it cannot function on fiat money. And none of those who are responsible for this want to admit it, but that is the fact.
The fiat system of money is a man-made law, and it's been abused. Is there a form of money whose law is not set by man?
When you look at natural law and gold, I sort of describe gold as being a natural form of money. All of the gold that's been mined throughout history still exists in its above-ground stock. It's about the size of 2.5 Olympic swimming pools if you put all that gold together in one place. And the key is that this above ground stock of gold grows by about 1.75% per annum, which is approximately equal to New World population growth, and is approximately equal to new wealth creation. So as the net result of this is that you have this very good consistency in gold's purchasing power over long periods of time, because the supply-demand equation is very much in balance. To achieve human liberty, you really need to have sound money, and gold is the only way to do that, because only gold is outside of the control of politicians.
With modern man-made monetary processes, a chronic excess of debt has built up at every level of society. Debt is now regarded as normal. It isn't. It's a form of slavery. But how much do we question our debt? And what should we now do about it?
The classic example, most recently, of a debt cancellation was the German economic miracle in 1947. The Allies canceled all domestic and international German debts, except for the debts that employers owed their employees for the previous few weeks, and except for a basic working balance that everybody was able to keep in the bank in order to buy food for the next few weeks or so. Essentially, you would follow the 5 or 6 pages that the currency reform of 1947 did in Germany. You would start with a clean slate. That means that everybody would own their property free and clear. And the problem here is that you'd wipe off the savings that are the counterparts of that. That actually would not be such a bad thing if you look at the fact that the wealthiest 1% of Americans have concentrated an enormous amount of wealth in their own hands, more than at any earlier time since statistics have been kept.
Our system of taxation also needs addressing. Currently, we're taxed on what we produce. Perhaps it would be more progressive to tax what we consume. How many American people realize that the Founding Fathers never intended Americans to be taxed on their labor? In other words, they weren't meant to pay income tax. The tax system that was exported from Britain, a relic of colonialism, has duped the world.
The most important element of a tax system is to do what everybody expected to be done in the 19th century, and that is to base the tax system on land taxation, on the free lunch of land value, and on what John Stuart Mill called the unearned increment, the income that landlords made in their sleep, as he put it.
Who made oil in the ground, coal or iron ore? These are things which are not the products of human effort. Of course, extracting them is, but their existence is not. And so the rents from natural resources are a wonderful source of taxation. Nobody made them, and when you do tax them, you cause all of us to use them more efficiently. So this seems like really the excellent thing to tax, rather than labor and capital.
If the governments used this land site value that's supplied by nature, not by human labor, not by personal enterprise, then the government would not have to tax wages in the form of income tax. It wouldn't have to imply sales tax that add to the price of doing business, and it wouldn't have to add the proliferation of business taxes.
This tax system, advocated by all the classical economists, would begin to address global poverty, as it would allow citizens in developing countries to keep their resource wealth. In developed countries, it would begin to address our housing and debt crisis and unleash the kind of entrepreneurship needed to refloat our economies. Perhaps we should also resurrect another timeless principle for workers that was promoted during the Industrial Revolution.
Well, the idea that people who work in a plant ought to own it is just deeply built into working class culture. So right around here at the early Industrial Revolution in the late 19th century, working people simply took for granted that, yes, of course, the workers should own the mills in which they work. Anything else is an attack on our fundamental rights as free citizens. They also took for granted that wage labor is hardly different from slavery. It's different only because it's temporary. And then you can be free. One of the ways you can be free is by owning your own plants. That was not an exotic view. That was Abraham Lincoln's view. In fact, it was a principle of the Republican Party in the late 19th century. It's taken a lot of effort to drive those ideas out of people's heads, but they're still there, and they are very relevant.
It was the Greek philosopher Plato who said the ratio of earnings between highest and lowest paid employee in any organisation should be no more than 6-to-1. In 1923, banker J.P. Morgan declared no more than 20-to-1 was optimum. Yet today's salary difference between top and bottom earners in global corporations can be higher than 500 or 1,000-to-1.
When you're up in the range of 500-to-1 inequality, the rich and the poor become almost different species, no longer members of the same community. Commonality of interest is lost. And so it's difficult to form community and to have good, friendly relationships across class differences that are that large.
When the public do vent their outrage at inappropriate earnings, the common defence is to move the debate to the psychological realm and quote mercurial British economist Herbert Spencer. He coined the phrase survival of the fittest, and his words are now used to justify excess. Competition in business is a good thing, but the playing field must be level. Monopolists have too much because the system they game is rigged. Under the current economic setup, the fitness of the vast majority of the world's population is irrelevant. Those that are made to pay for this crisis are not those that caused it. But those who caused it, for survival, will no doubt try to marginalize this film as socialist or even Marxist.
I'm a capitalist. I'm a business person. I believe in the basic principles. That's why I'm completely appalled by seeing these principles destroyed by monarchs, monopolists, who have totally destroyed the system from within on Wall Street. And this is completely unacceptable.
I'm a capitalist. I think capitalism can do it. It's not a question of getting rid of capitalism. It's a question of getting rid of this terrible form of capitalism.
Capitalism, more broadly understood as market economy, not only has a future, I can't see the future of the world without it. But the question is, what kind of capitalism? What kind of market economy?
A system of reformed capitalism built on independent money, a tax system based on consumption, not income, and employee-owned businesses would begin to build an economy that's not dependent on constant growth to service its debt. We've endured the so-called free market for centuries, but far from being free, it's led us to destroy nature and each other in a vain attempt to progress.
It's absolutely ludicrous to suggest that somehow there is a scientifically defined boundary of the market that we should never change. You know? And of course, that's what the free market economy wants you to believe. You know? Because once they convince you of that and claim that, on top of that, claim that they have the truth because they are, PhDs in economics, then they can tell you whatever they want, and then you'll have to accept it. But that's where we have to take these guys on. Politics is about drawing the boundary of the market. When you think about it, a lot of things have been taken out of the market over the last 2-3 centuries. 2-3 centuries ago, you could buy and sell human beings, child labor, a lot of things that you wouldn't imagine you could buy and sell today. So, over time, we have redrawn this boundary, and there's nothing wrong with redrawing the boundary again.
Things that were considered absolutely reasonable in the 1850s, like selling any chemical on a street corner and telling you that it's a pharmaceutical drug that will be good for you, things like that were absolutely commonplace then, are now serious criminal offences. Well, the same thing will be true of active money management in 100 years.
The breakdown we saw in the Great Depression and witnessed again at the beginning of the 21st century occurred because in the name of growth, much was taken out of the system by those who contribute very little. Multinational corporates and banks will always want to grow without having to compensate those people who actually do the work to produce the surplus. In the past, every time too much was taken